Well, welcome to the video that's all about the basics of setting a budget. So the first question that you may be asking, or the thing that you may be saying to yourself is, I have a budget. I have this budget on Excel and I track I have this budget, but for some reason it's not working. So your real question may be, how do you have a budget that you can actually maintain? And I'm going to fast forward a little bit to the next video, but I want to tell you that the number one thing that I can see that people can do in order to maintain a budget is to utilize a free money app. Again, we really like Mint, and we'll be talking about that more in the next video. But the number one way that you can maintain your budget is to have some type of app that updates on a daily basis. You can see where your spending is that day, that week, that month, and it gives you and or your spouse the ability to see live where your spending is for the month. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty on how to create an excellent budget that you can use. We have provided you with a worksheet, and it's a great way to just start working on your budget. I find that this is a lot more helpful than just diving into Mint right away. And the great thing about our budget is the calculations are built in. So you'll be able to put in your income, your expenses, and then you'll be able to look at the bottom and see if your budget, if you have too many expenses or if there's money left over. So it's a great tool to be able to use throughout this process. And there's 6 steps to creating a great budget. The first step is to determine your net income. This is the income that goes into your checking account on a regular basis, whether it's monthly or every other week or twice a month. So this is your salary. And there may be some of you who get large bonuses, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a future video. Also, one other thing to keep in mind is I always recommend that people do budgets on a monthly basis. It's the perfect amount of time. A year seems to be a little bit too long. I like to have people think about their budgets on a monthly basis. So now that you know what your monthly income is, your net income is, now let's take a look at your expenses. I usually recommend that you look back 3 months worth of expenses. There's going to be some that are obvious. Your mortgage or your rent, that should be staying the same every month. But you may want for other expenses to take an average, such as your grocery expenses. So go back, take a look at where you've been spending your money over the last 3 months and start to fill those items in on the budget worksheet. Okay, so I also don't want you to get overwhelmed with having way too many expense categories. It's just too much to keep track of. So for this exercise, you can go ahead and fill out all the line items on the worksheet that I provided. But just know that when we go to put this into Mint, you may decide to consolidate some of these items so that you don't have as many budget categories to keep track of. Okay, so the third step to creating your budget is now to take a look through your expenses and deciding if any of them are too high. So here's a few guidelines. I usually recommend that your principal, interest, tax, and insurance, so we call it PITI, all the expenses related with owning your home, that those do not exceed 25%. They could be anywhere between 20 and 30%, but for sure not to exceed 30% of your overall expenses. The other thing is you need to make sure that your savings is around 10 to 20% of your income. Now this savings line may not come up on your budget because remember, this budget, it started with your net income. So chances are that your 401k contribution probably was taken out before that. But still, just take a look and see if your savings is around 10 to 20% of your total gross income, your total income for the year. So what you also need to do is take a look at the bottom of the worksheet because this is going to total up your income and your expenses. And if it's showing that your expenses are significantly less than your income, you really need to question that. So for example, if it's showing that you have $1,000 left over every month, you need to make sure that's accurate. And the only way that that is accurate is if you're really adding $1,000 every month to another savings account that's not being accounted for on your budget. Okay, before moving on to the third step, I want to recap what we did in the first two. In the first step, you wrote down your net income, the amount that's paid into your checking account on a regular basis. In the second step, you wrote down what your historical spending had been over the last 3 months to start to get an understanding of where your expenses are going. So now in the third step, we're going to create a balanced budget. We hear about that term, but what does that mean? A balanced budget means that you are not spending more than you're bringing in. And the other side to it is that there's not unaccounted for money. So meaning that you're not spending way less than you're bringing in either. So the way to do this, again, is once you've put in your income and the expenses in our worksheet, down at the bottom, it's going to calculate if you have been spending more money than you're making, or if you're not spending all the money that you've been making. And so a few things to think about here. First of all, if it shows you that you have $1,000 of extra money laying around that you're not spending, you really need to think to see if that is really what is happening. The only way that you would have that type of extra money is if you're putting it into a savings account every month that you haven't accounted for in your budget. So there really shouldn't be a reason for there to be a large amount of extra money that's left over. Then the next piece is if you're showing that you don't have enough money to cover your expenses. This is where you need to go back and figure out what expenses you can cut. So first of all, I'm going to mention some general guidelines. And the first one is for housing expenses. So your principal, interest, tax, and insurance. It's recommended that this does not exceed 30%. So take a look at that. Then I want you to look for other of your high expenses. Some people in this area get shocked on how much they spend on going out for coffee every day. Those little expenses can add up and make really big expenses. So if you're showing that you have a deficit, look for some of these items that you may be able to cut out in order to have a balanced budget. Okay, then the fourth step is making sure that your budget is in line to help you reach your goals. We're going to talk about these goals in later modules, so you're probably going to have to just put a little bit of a bookmark on this. But what I'm talking about here is making sure that you're saving enough for retirement, making sure that you're saving for your kids' college, making sure that you have the appropriate amount of life insurance and that you can afford it. So you're going to sort of hold on to this worksheet for a little bit. It's going to be a work in progress. Because then what's going to happen is later, as we talk about some of these other goals and how much you should be saving for retirement and for college and for life insurance and other things, you will then go back and build that into your budget to make sure that your budget is in line to help you reach your goals. So the fifth step on creating a budget that you can maintain is now to take this information and put it into some free money app. Again, we really like Mint, but the purpose of using this budgeting software is so that you can be constantly reminded on where you're at with your budget, that you and your spouse can be in communication on it, and you can stay on budget. The sixth step is to constantly be looking at your budget and tweaking it to making sure that it's accurate and it's working for you and your goals. So for example, I usually look at Mint once a week to see where our spending has been. And this gives you a really good idea on where you're at on your monthly budget. And then it's about twice a year that I do a really in-depth dive back into Mint and maybe adjust some of the budget categories. Maybe certain things in our lives have changed where some expenses have been eliminated or maybe some have been added. So I usually do a more in-depth look at our budget about twice a year. Okay, so before I wrap up this video, I want to give you one really key tip, and that is to give you a little bit of a preview for something we're going to talk about in a future video. The best way to help to get your budget to work for you is to find extra money that has just been laying around. So things such as making sure you have the right type of insurance or that you're handling your donations of your household items correctly. So there's a lot of little ways to find extra money in your budget. So please be watching out for and check out the video all about how to find extra money in your budget. Okay, so I've given you all the tools you need to create a budget. So go work on it, and next week when we talk on our live Q&A call, I can't wait to hear about the progress that you've made, about the budgets that you've created. I can't wait to hear that you've started to use Mint and put the information in there. So I'll talk to you next week.